The year is 1974. The air in Chicago's Golden Spoon restaurant hung heavy with the scent of garlic, red sauce, and cigar smoke. Laughter and clinking glasses filled the cavernous room, a celebratory din. At a large, prominent table, Muhammad Ali, fresh from another triumphant boxing match, held court. His booming laughter echoed above the general din as he regaled a small crowd of reporters and friends with tales from the ring, his golden brown eyes sparkling with an infectious joy. The table was a battlefield of half-eaten plates, scattered napkins, and overflowing champagne flutes, testament to a night of good food and even better company. Ali, still radiating the electric energy of a champion, leaned back in his chair, a picture of confident ease. Suddenly, a shadow fell over the table. The laughter faltered, then died. All eyes turned to the imposing figure now standing beside Ali, Carlo, the Hammer. Russi, a name whispered with a mixture of fear and respect in certain circles, was a man built like a brick wall, impeccably dressed in a dark suit that did little to conceal the raw power emanating from him. His face, usually a mask of cold indifference, was flushed a deep crimson, his eyes glinting with a dangerous intensity. Without a word, he slammed his open palm onto the table. Plates jumped, cutlery rattled, and a glass of water toppled, sending a small wave across the pristine white tablecloth. The sudden violent interruption silenced the entire restaurant. Every conversation ceased. Every fork paused midway to a mouth. A collective intake of breath could almost be heard. Rossi leaned in, his face mere inches from Ali's. His voice, though not a shout, carried an undeniable menace, cutting through the stunned silence. "Ali, you owe us," he growled, the words dripping with contempt. "You talk too much. You fight for us, or you don't fight at all. Understand?" As he spoke, his large, powerful hand shot out, clamping down on Ali's shoulder, squeezing with an almost agonizing pressure. The room held its breath, expecting the explosive reaction synonymous with the unpredictable champion. Ali, however, did not flinch. His gaze, calm and unwavering, met Rossi's. He looked down at the large hand gripping his shoulder, then slowly back up to the mob boss's eyes. A small, almost imperceptible smile played on his lips, a knowing, enigmatic expression that offered no comfort to Rossi. The silence in the restaurant deepened, thick with anticipation. Everyone present knew Ali's reputation for quick retorts, for fiery defiance. They expected a verbal volley, a challenge, perhaps even a physical confrontation. But Ali remained perfectly still, his composure a stark contrast to the seething anger radiating from Rossi. Then, with a deliberate slowness that bordered on theatrical, Ali reached up. His hand, as quick and precise as a viper's strike in the ring, yet gentle as a feather in this moment, closed over Rossi's wrist. He didn't pull, he didn't yank. He merely guided Rossi's hand away from his shoulder, almost as if he were removing a stray piece of lint. The movement was so fluid, so unhurried, that it seemed to disarm Rossi more than any punch ever could. Without breaking eye contact, Ali then reached for a fresh napkin from the table. He unfolded it with meticulous care, then slowly, deliberately, wiped the spot on his shoulder where Rossi's hand had been. The gesture was utterly devoid of anger, yet undeniably dismissive. He then crumpled the napkin into a small ball and placed it neatly on the edge of the table, as if it were a dirty rag. Not a single word escaped his lips. Sometimes, silence speaks louder than any punch. Ali's small smile widened slightly, but his eyes, which had held a knowing glint, now hardened, becoming steely, unyielding. He leaned forward just a fraction, his voice a low, almost conversational tone that somehow carried to the furthest corners of the suddenly hushed room. "Is that all you got?" he asked, his gaze never leaving Rosie's face. A collective murmur rippled through the restaurant, confusion mixed with a growing sense of awe. What would happen next? The air crackled with unresolved tension, a prelude to something far greater. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. The narrative now shifts, pulling back from the tense Chicago evening to explore the foundations of the man who stood so defiantly against Carlo Rossi. To truly understand Muhammad Ali's audacious response, one must first understand the world that forged Cassius Clay. His story began in Louisville, Kentucky, in a working-class black neighborhood where the sense of community was as strong and resilient as the people themselves. It was a place where front porches were stages for storytelling, where the aroma of Sunday dinners wafted from open windows, and where the rhythmic sounds of jazz and gospel music were the constant, comforting soundtrack of daily life. The church, more than just a place of worship, was the beating heart of the community, a center for social gathering, spiritual solace, and collective strength against the pervasive backdrop of racial segregation. Here, young Cassius learned the values of respect for elders, the importance of standing up for oneself, and the subtle art of navigating a world where black men had to be both deferential and strong, often at the same time. His parents, Odessa and Cassius Sr., instilled in him a blend of Southern grace and fierce independence. Odessa, with her quiet strength, nurtured his dreams, while Cassius Sr., a sign painter and musician, passed on his artistic flair and an early appreciation for self-expression. Their hopes for their children were simple yet profound: to live with dignity and to make their mark on a world that often sought to diminish them. Cassius's early life was a familiar rhythm of school, chores, and playing with friends in the dusty streets. But it was a seemingly insignificant event that would irrevocably alter his trajectory: the theft of his prized red Schwinn bicycle. A furious 12-year-old Cassius reported the crime to Officer Joe Martin, a white police officer who also happened to be a boxing trainer. Martin, impressed by the boy's fiery spirit, suggested he learn to box. This pivotal moment didn't just lead him to the gym. It introduced him to an arena where his innate confidence, quick wit, and burgeoning physical prowess could be channeled and celebrated. From those early days, the boxing gym became his second home. He embraced the discipline, the grueling training, and the joy of winning. It was there that his unique style, the float like a butterfly, sting like a bee, began to take shape. More than just a fighter, Cassius was a showman, a poet, and a prophet of his own greatness. His confidence, initially perceived as boastfulness, was an armor against a world that constantly tried to tell him he wasn't enough. He learned early about the types of people who would try to use him: the small-time promoters and local figures eager to hitch their wagons to a rising star. He observed their tactics, their promises, and their underlying desire for control. These early encounters, though minor, were invaluable lessons in discernment. His meteoric rise from Olympic gold medalist in 1960 to professional champion was swift and dazzling. The world watched as Cassius Clay transformed into Muhammad Ali, a change that was far more than just a new name. It was a declaration of identity, faith, and independence that sent shockwaves across the globe. His conversion to Islam and his outspoken political views ignited intense controversy, costing him his title and years of his career. Yet, through it all, he remained unwavering. He refused to be controlled, to be silenced, or to compromise his beliefs. This period was not just a test of his convictions, it was a powerful training ground, preparing him for future confrontations, teaching him that true power lay not in conforming, but in the unshakable courage to be authentically himself, no matter the cost. He carried these lessons, this unyielding resolve, into every room he entered, including the one where Carlo Rossi dared to challenge him. Ali's encounters with attempts to control him weren't isolated incidents. They were a recurring pattern, a constant undercurrent throughout his burgeoning career, shaping his resolve and deepening his distrust of those who sought to manipulate him. Long before Carlo Rossi, there were other figures, less overtly menacing, perhaps, but equally insidious in their intentions. Early business deals were often fraught with peril for young, ambitious athletes. Stories abounded of managers and promoters who saw fighters not as men, but as commodities to be exploited. Ali, even in his youth, quickly grew frustrated with the convoluted contracts, the vague promises, and the thinly veiled attempts to dictate not just his fighting schedule, but his public persona. He learned to scrutinize every clause, to question every handshake, understanding that a signature could mean the surrender of his autonomy. These early lessons, though painful, forged a keen awareness of the predatory nature of the industry and instilled in him a deep-seated desire for self-determination. The most significant and publicly scrutinized instance of external pressure came with his conversion to the Nation of Islam and his subsequent change of name from Cassius Clay to Muhammad Ali. This decision, a deeply personal and spiritual one, ignited a firestorm of controversy. Society, the government, and even many within the boxing world vehemently pressured him to denounce his new faith. Sports commentators, politicians, and former heroes publicly condemned him, painting him as un-American and a radical. The pressure was immense, a relentless bombardment of criticism and ostracization. Yet, Ali steadfastly refused to recant. He stood firm, even when it cost him years of his prime career, his boxing license, and his heavyweight title. This period was a crucible, demonstrating his unwavering conviction and his absolute refusal to be controlled or dictated to, even when facing the combined might of an entire nation's disapproval. His refusal to be drafted into the Vietnam War further cemented his image as an unyielding rebel. His declaration, "I ain't got no quarrel with them Viet Cong," led to a public backlash that dwarfed even the uproar over his religious conversion. He was stripped of his boxing license, his world title, and his passport. He faced financial hardship, unable to fight and earn a living. The personal cost was staggering, yet he never wavered. This was perhaps the most profound example of him defying powerful forces despite immense personal sacrifice. He chose conscience over career, freedom over fortune, establishing a precedent for his future responses to intimidation. Throughout his career, Ali also endured countless subtle humiliations. There were instances where people in power, often white establishment figures, tried to belittle him, dismiss his intelligence, or treat him as a mere athlete, a performing animal to be paraded and exploited. They underestimated his intellect, his wit, and his profound understanding of social dynamics. His public defiance through sharp words, cutting retorts, and unshakable confidence became his armor. He understood that respect was not given, it was commanded, especially in a world that sought to deny it to him. He also experienced the sting of broken promises. Times when promoters, managers, or even supposed friends made grand assurances about fights, money, or support that never materialized. These betrayals further solidified his distrust of those who sought to control him with false hope or empty words. He learned that true allies were rare, and that ultimately he had to rely on his own judgment and strength. And then there was the pervasive shadow of the mob. Organized crime's influence in boxing during that era was an open secret, a dark stain on the sport. They tried to get their hooks into fighters, fix fights, or extort money. Ali, highly intelligent and acutely observant, was keenly aware of this underworld and its dangers. He saw how other fighters were trapped, how their careers and lives were dictated by unseen hands. These experiences, from the overt threats to the subtle manipulations, built his resolve brick by brick. They taught him how to handle powerful, dangerous men, not just with his fists, but with his mind and his unyielding spirit. He carried these lessons into every interaction, shaping the man who would calmly face Carlo, the Hammer, Russi. Ali's encounters with attempts to control him weren't isolated incidents. They were a recurring pattern, a constant undercurrent throughout his burgeoning career, shaping his resolve and deepening his distrust of those who sought to manipulate him. Long before Carlo Rossi, there were other figures, less overtly menacing, perhaps, but equally insidious in their intentions. Early business deals were often fraught with peril for young, ambitious athletes. Stories abounded of managers and promoters who saw fighters not as men, but as commodities to be exploited. Ali, even in his youth, quickly grew frustrated with the convoluted contracts, the vague promises, and the thinly veiled attempts to dictate not just his fighting schedule, but his public persona. He learned to scrutinize every clause, to question every handshake, understanding that a signature could mean the surrender of his autonomy. These early lessons, though painful, forged a keen awareness of the predatory nature of the industry and instilled in him a deep-seated desire for self-determination. The most significant and publicly scrutinized instance of external pressure came with his conversion to the Nation of Islam and his subsequent change of name from Cassius Clay to Muhammad Ali. This decision, a deeply personal and spiritual one, ignited a firestorm of controversy. Society, the government, and even many within the boxing world vehemently pressured him to denounce his new faith. Sports commentators, politicians, and former heroes publicly condemned him, painting him as un-American and a radical. The pressure was immense, a relentless bombardment of criticism and ostracization. Yet, Ali steadfastly refused to recant. He stood firm, even when it cost him years of his prime career, his boxing license, and his heavyweight title. This period was a crucible, demonstrating his unwavering conviction and his absolute refusal to be controlled or dictated to, even when facing the combined might of an entire nation's disapproval. His refusal to be drafted into the Vietnam War further cemented his image as an unyielding rebel. His declaration, "I ain't got no quarrel with them Viet Cong," led to a public backlash that dwarfed even the uproar over his religious conversion. He was stripped of his boxing license, his world title, and his passport. He faced financial hardship, unable to fight and earn a living. The personal cost was staggering, yet he never wavered. This was perhaps the most profound example of him defying powerful forces despite immense personal sacrifice. He chose conscience over career, freedom over fortune, establishing a precedent for his future responses to intimidation. Throughout his career, Ali also endured countless subtle humiliations. There were instances where people in power, often white establishment figures, tried to belittle him, dismiss his intelligence, or treat him as a mere athlete, a performing animal to be paraded and exploited. They underestimated his intellect, his wit, and his profound understanding of social dynamics. His public defiance through sharp words, cutting retorts, and unshakable confidence became his armor. He understood that respect was not given, it was commanded, especially in a world that sought to deny it to him. He also experienced the sting of broken promises. Times when promoters, managers, or even supposed friends made grand assurances about fights, money, or support that never materialized. These betrayals further solidified his distrust of those who sought to control him with false hope or empty words. He learned that true allies were rare, and that ultimately he had to rely on his own judgment and strength. And then there was the pervasive shadow of the mob. Organized crime's influence in boxing during that era was an open secret, a dark stain on the sport. They tried to get their hooks into fighters, fix fights, or extort money. Ali, highly intelligent and acutely observant, was keenly aware of this underworld and its dangers. He saw how other fighters were trapped, how their careers and lives were dictated by unseen hands. These experiences, from the overt threats to the subtle manipulations, built his resolve brick by brick. They taught him how to handle powerful, dangerous men, not just with his fists, but with his mind and his unyielding spirit. He carried these lessons into every interaction, shaping the man who would calmly face Carlo, the Hammer, Rossi. Ali's growing resolve wasn't just a reaction to these pressures. It was a deliberate cultivation of inner strength and external strategy. Despite his public persona as a boisterous showman, Ali was a shrewd and silent observer. He learned to read people, to discern motives, especially from those who operated with hidden agendas. He noticed the subtle ways mob figures insinuated themselves into the background of boxing events, their quiet conversations in dimly lit corners, their unspoken power. He watched, he listened, and he cataloged these observations, building an understanding of their tactics. His ability to remain calm under immense pressure wasn't merely inherent. It was a practiced skill, honed by years of facing taunts from opponents in the ring and racial slurs from hostile crowds outside of it. He understood that showing fear was not just a personal weakness, but an invitation for further exploitation. His unflappable demeanor in the face of provocation became a shield, deflecting the psychological jabs as effectively as he dodged punches. Recognizing the necessity of a strong support system, Ali intentionally surrounded himself with a trusted circle of advisors, trainers, and friends who genuinely had his best interests at heart. This inner sanctum provided a crucial buffer against external manipulation, a place where he could be vulnerable, strategize, and receive honest counsel. He learned who he could truly count on, distinguishing genuine loyalty from opportunistic flattery. Despite past financial setbacks and the years he lost from boxing, Ali worked tirelessly to regain control of his finances. He understood that money was a potent tool of control for many, and financial independence was key to maintaining his autonomy. He sought a position where he couldn't be easily bought, coerced, or threatened into submission. Beyond his physical prowess, Ali recognized that his greatest weapon was his voice and his global platform. He was a master of media, understanding how to command attention and use public opinion to his advantage. He knew that making powerful figures' illicit dealings public would be far more damaging to them than any physical confrontation. He made it difficult for them to operate in the shadows when he was prepared to shine a spotlight on their activities. While he never explicitly formulated a plan specifically for a figure like Rossi, his entire life and career choices constituted a consistent rejection of being controlled. His strategy was simply to be himself, unapologetically, defiantly. He had decided long ago that no one, absolutely no one, would ever truly own him. This unwavering commitment to self-determination, forged through years of struggle and resilience, was the foundation upon which his surprising response to Carlo the Hammer Rossi would be built. The smoky haze of the Golden Spoon restaurant still hung heavy in the air, but the silence at Ali's table was even thicker, a palpable tension following his quiet defiance. Moments after he had gently, almost fastidiously, removed Carlo, the Hammer, Rossi's hand from his shoulder and discarded the napkin used to wipe the imaginary grime, all eyes were fixed on the boxing legend. The murmurs had died down, replaced by an expectant hush. Everyone anticipated the usual Ali, the boisterous, witty showman, to unleash a verbal barrage, or perhaps even a physical challenge. But Ali, in a move that was both calculated and profoundly characteristic, chose a different path. Instead of an angry outburst, Ali leaned forward slightly, his gaze unwavering, locking directly with Rossi's eyes. He spoke, not with the booming theatricality of his pre-fight press conferences, but in a clear, calm voice. Yet, despite its measured tone, it carried enough resonance to cut through the lingering tension, loud enough for every reporter and curious diner in the immediate vicinity to distinctly hear each word. This was not a private admonishment. It was a public declaration. The surprise element in his delivery was not just the absence of aggression, but the subtle, almost conversational way he began. He didn't threaten Rossi back physically, didn't issue a direct challenge to his authority. Instead, Ali began, "Carlo, you know what?" He paused just long enough for the question to hang in the air, drawing Rossi further into his web, before continuing. "Before you came over, I was just telling these reporters about all the good people who helped me get where I am. The real ones, the honest ones, who believed in me and respected me." He let his eyes sweep across the faces of the assembled journalists, some of whom were already reaching for their pens, sensing a story unfolding. "And," Ali continued, his voice dropping slightly, but losing none of its clarity, "I was just about to tell them about the other kind of people, the ones who try to muscle their way in, who think they own everything, who believe they can tell a man what to do and where to fight." He allowed another beat of silence to settle, a master of timing, before delivering the true turning of the tables. His smile, which had been small and knowing, now widened, transforming into something genuinely powerful, almost predatory. "Funny thing is, Carlo," he resumed, his gaze once again firmly fixed on the mob boss, "I was just about to tell them how I'm going to expose every single one of them. How I'm going to use my platform, my voice, my fame, to shine a light on their dirty business. How I'm going to tell the whole world about their methods, their threats, their attempts to control." Ali leaned back slightly, a picture of confident ease, yet his eyes remained sharp, unwavering. "And how I'm going to start with the first name that comes to mind, which, right now, just happens to be yours, Carlo." Rossi's reaction was immediate and telling. The color visibly drained from his face, leaving him pale and stunned. He was accustomed to fear, to immediate compliance, to the deference that his reputation and power commanded. But this was different. This was not a physical threat he could counter with his own brute force or connections. This was a public, indirect, yet devastatingly effective threat from someone whose fame and reach far surpassed his own criminal empire. He looked around frantically, his eyes darting from Ali to the reporters, some of whom were indeed scribbling furiously, their faces alight with the thrill of an unexpected scoop. Rossi understood, perhaps for the first time, that Ali wasn't threatening a street brawl or a backroom shakedown. He was threatening exposure, public humiliation, and the unwelcome glare of media scrutiny. which was infinitely more dangerous for a man who thrived in the shadows. Ali, sensing his advantage, pressed it with a final, decisive flourish. His smile remained, a genuine, powerful expression of triumph. "So, Carlo," he concluded, his voice ringing with an undeniable authority, "you want me to fight for you, or do you want me to talk about you? Your choice." Rossi, flustered and cornered, his carefully constructed facade crumbling around him, pulled his hand back completely, as if Ali's shoulder had suddenly become searing hot. He muttered something unintelligible, a choked sound that might have been an apology or a curse, gave Ali a weak, forced smile that didn't reach his eyes, and quickly, almost desperately, backed away. He turned, his imposing figure suddenly seeming diminished, and disappeared into the throng of surprised onlookers and whispering diners. The restaurant, which had held its breath, now erupted in murmurs and whispers, the tension breaking into a cacophony of speculation and awe. Ali had won, not with a punch, but with words, wit, and an unshakable understanding of his own formidable power. Rossi's hasty retreat from the Golden Spoon was not merely an embarrassment. It was a public unraveling of his carefully cultivated aura of invincibility. In the tight-knit, hierarchical world of organized crime, reputation was currency, and Ali's calculated act had devalued Rossi significantly. The implied threat of exposure, coming from a figure as globally recognized and revered as Muhammad Ali, made Rossi a liability in certain circles. While he didn't vanish into obscurity, his ability to openly strong-arm high-profile figures, particularly those with a public platform, was severely diminished. The incident became a whispered legend, a cautionary tale among his peers and subordinates. There were some lines even Carlo, the Hammer, Rossi couldn't cross without suffering consequences. He had learned a very public, very painful lesson about who he could and could not intimidate. A lesson delivered not through violence, but through the sheer moral and rhetorical force of a singular individual. For Muhammad Ali, the confrontation was another defining moment, one that reaffirmed his core beliefs and solidified his unique position in the world. He continued his career, his path now cleared of that specific, insidious threat. The episode reinforced his conviction in standing his ground, in the power of his voice, and in the moral authority he wielded far beyond the boxing ring. It became another story, perhaps not as widely publicized as his championship bouts or his stance against the Vietnam War, but one whispered among his inner circle, further solidifying his image as someone truly untouchable, not just by opponents' fists, but by the shadowy forces that sought to control others. He was, in essence, his own man, beholden to no one. Ali's actions that night weren't about physical violence or even direct confrontation in the traditional sense. They were a masterclass in psychological warfare, a sophisticated display of power, intelligence, and dignity. He demonstrated that true strength wasn't solely physical, but resided in the courage to defy those who sought to control you, especially when you stood to gain nothing tangible and risked everything. He understood that for men like Rossi, public exposure and the loss of face were far more potent weapons than any punch. Ali had turned the tables not by lowering himself to Rossi's level, but by elevating the discourse, using his platform to threaten the very foundation of Rossi's power, his anonymity and the fear he inspired. This response became a quiet legend, woven into the rich tapestry of Ali's life, another testament to his extraordinary character. It was another example of Muhammad Ali, the man, being every bit as formidable, surprising, and complex as Muhammad Ali, the boxer. He was a man who knew his worth, who understood his power, and who would not let anyone, no matter how powerful or menacing, take that worth or power from him. He had faced down governments, social ostracization, and the raw physical threat of the world's best heavyweights. To him, Carlo Rossi was just another opponent, albeit one who required a different kind of strategy. In the end, this incident, like so many others in his storied life, underscored why he truly was the greatest in every sense of the word. Not just for his unparalleled skill in the ring, but for his unwavering spirit, his profound understanding of justice, and his unyielding commitment to freedom and self-determination. He was a champion of the people, and he proved, once again, that his fight extended far beyond the ropes, into the very fabric of society, where he continually challenged the powerful and defended the dignity of the individual. His legacy was not just about boxing, it was about standing tall, speaking truth to power, and inspiring generations to believe in their own voice, even when faced with the most daunting adversaries.